acknowledge what we've done and feel the greatness from which we've come. Remember that a fruit never falls far from its tree. So like our ancestors, we must control our destiny. Self-determination, self-determination. Kujichagulia, self-determination. So as we educate our children, tell the truth. Let us always think about the millions who came before and sacrificed their lives so that our mighty people would survive. And the glory of our past we soon revive. Yeah. Every day we face a challenge. You and I, our future's hanging in the balance. So we must do whatever can be done. We must not be dependent on anyone. That way we can be sure that our interests are secure. Please tell me why in this world others thrive while you and I daily cry as we try to survive. Please tell me why. Self-determination means self-determination. Hey, Kujichagulia, you know we need self-determination. Self-determination. Kujichagulia, Kujichagulia. Self-determination means self-determination. Kujichagulia, self-determination.
Whoopsies. Hi. Hello, hello, hello. Greetings, everybody. I think I might be a little bit choppy. Let's see if I can fix this. But greetings, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the very, very first episode of Weekly Pan-African News for 2022. Very exciting. We know we've been gone for a while. We missed you. We're happy to be back to kick off the new year with some revolutionary Pan-African content. I'm just closing things frantically to see if the choppiness gets fixed. Let's do it. But anywho, my name is Onisanmu. I'm an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party Southwest chapter. Southwest, not New Mexico, now we're Southwest. I'll talk about it. And this is Weekly Pan-African News, a bi-weekly web show that the Southwest chapter, formerly New Mexico chapter, has been doing since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are entering year 3. There is no end in sight within the United States. It's kind of rough, but we have kept this show going for 3 years because we understood that COVID-19 was going to hit hard, that the U.S. empire was not going to be able to organize a coherent response, that our people, African people in particular, were going to be at high risk, And so we were like, how do we continue to build with our people without gathering them in person and exposing them to this deadly virus? And this show is one of several ways we came up with to do precisely that. And so we have a regular audience of folks that join us each episode who we deeply appreciate. I'm going to say hi to y'all. Good morning, Emma. Good morning, Marion. Good morning, Ricky. Good morning, Mako. Good morning, John. Good morning, Deborah. Oh my God, everybody's here. It's so good to see y'all. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to everybody. But if you are a frequent watcher of the show, which quite a few of you are, then you know that we always open the same way with a couple of things. First, I talk about who the heck I am. And I am Onya Sandu, an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And what is the All African People's Revolutionary Party, or AAPRP? Well, the AAPRP is a revolutionary pan-African socialist mass political party based in Africa, founded in Africa by Kwame Nkrumah, the first democratically elected president of Ghana after Ghana gained its independence from British colonialism, a great father of Pan-Africanism, alongside folks like George Padmore, C.L.R. James, Marcus Garvey, and so on. He called for the formation of the APRP in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, a book he wrote after being overthrown by an illegal CIA-orchestrated coup. He was exiled to Guinea. He became co-president of Guinea with Sékou Touré. And while he was in Guinea, he wrote this book where he was like, well, clearly, these imperialists, these capitalists, are not going to let Africa live. Clearly, they are not going to allow us a peaceful transition to self-determination and Pan-Africanism. And therefore, we must wage a revolutionary struggle in order to win our liberation as African people and as a continent. And so he called for the formation of the APRP. He called for the formation of the All-African Committee for Political Coordination. He called for the formation of the All-African People's Revolutionary Army, all as part of a plan to liberate and unify Africa under scientific socialism and finally free our home from the clutches of the imperialists. So that's why the APRP exists. That's why I'm in it. That's why we are talking to y'all today. The other thing that we do at the beginning of every show is that we want to call in a revolutionary African ancestor. And I feel like this is extremely important to do every time we're in space, every time we're talking about movement work, every time we're engaged in political education. Let's honor our ancestors. And the reason why I feel like that's really, really important is because these people be lying on our ancestors. They will bald-faced lie about basic facts about our history, about our struggle, about our heroes, just like as a matter of course. Like they just put Sister Maya Angelou on a quarter. It was like a slave master who like raped African woman on the other side. And that's supposed to be like an honor for us. Meanwhile, Maya Angelou was a Pan-Africanist. Maya Angelou traveled to Ghana alongside Malcolm X, alongside Nina Simone, alongside Martin Luther King when Kwame Nkrumah was elected president and was like, this is what we need to do, support of African liberation. The U.S. will never talk about that history, those politics of Maya Angelou. They'll take her image and slap it on some slave master money, though. That's how they so-called honor our ancestors. They tell at best a fraction of the story, or they simply use their image, their aesthetic, to advance the interests of empire. So it's not about us, it's about propping up this dysfunctional nonsense that's exploiting and oppressing us. And so when we honor our ancestors, we can tell the truth. We can share who they were. We can share what they believe. We can share the contributions they made, the full context, the full history, no matter how radical. In fact, the more radical, the better. So it's really important for us to honor our ancestors, to call their names, to speak about who they were and what they believe, because this system, this capitalist imperialist system, and this backward society lies on them constantly, exploits their images constantly, and does everything it can to destroy their legacy so that we cannot use it to liberate ourselves. So that's kind of how I think about calling in ancestors. And so that's why I do it. So the ancestor we want to call in today is none other than Miss Amy Ashwood Garvey. Yes, relation. She is the ex-wife, or rather she was the ex-wife of the Honorable Marcus Garvey. Both of them were founders of the United Negro Improvement Association, the organization which is the largest African organization to exist to this day. There were millions of African people all over the world inside the UNIA, and it would not have existed without the contributions of Amy Ashford Garvey. So she was, like I said, the co-founder of the UNIA, the largest African organization outside of Africa. She was a lecturer, playwright, and Pan-African organizer. At a young age, she supported the building of the United Negro Improvement Association in Jamaica, and then she moved to the United States to build the UNIA ACL with Marcus Garvey. After they were divorced, Amy Ashford Garvey continued to organize and support the expansion of Pan-Africanism. She notably introduced a young Hello. I think I'm back. Sorry about that. So I tried to switch the camera and the whole thing shut down. I feel like that was one of the best intros that I've ever done. The stream got cut off halfway. But we're back. It looks like things should be a little bit smoother. Let me know how it's looking for y'all. We'll let folks come back in. Hello? Okay, cool. All right. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's like Mercury and Gatorade. Like, lots of technical issues, lots of logistical problems. As soon as I got back. However, we're gonna keep going. So yeah, I apologize. This is a practice run, and the next time we do a stream, hopefully it'll be a lot better as we work out the issues that popped up while I was out of the country. Maybe it's the government trying to shut us down. But anywho, so you can hear me. Video, unfortunately, is not cooperating, but we will proceed and we will do our best with what we got. And I appreciate, again, your patience and your feedback as we struggle through these technical difficulties. But yeah, so did the intro, did the ancestor, Amy Ashford Garvey. Now, last part of the intro, I am speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, otherwise known as the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. The Tiwa people are the rightful owners upon which the city of Albuquerque was built by Spanish colonizers. The Tiwa people are still here. This land still belongs to them. They are here defending the earth. They are here defending the water. They are here fighting for their land back. And we, as African people, as a revolutionary African organization, want to express our unequivocal solidarity with the struggles of the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island to get their land back. Because the very same people, the very same colonizers that stole land throughout the Western Hemisphere also stole land throughout Africa, also stole land throughout the Middle East and occupied Palestine, stole land across Asia and Oceania and Australia. Stolen land all over the world, indigenous peoples around this planet fighting to get it back. We are on the front lines of that struggle. Land was taken and land will be returned with the just struggles for liberation of indigenous peoples of this planet. So that is the land acknowledgement. It's not something we say just to say. We are saying it to say this is a demand of our struggle. This is something that we are fighting for. It's something that we will see, including here in the United States. So that's the land acknowledgement. Let's get into the meat of the show. So we always do a political education section of the program. Oh yeah, you see someone else having news. BT News, which is an excellent YouTube channel, is also having a lot of problems. So it seems like it might be YouTube related. Also, it seems like my video is definitely choppy, but it looks like the audio is better. So if the audio goes out, please let me know. Because if both of those things aren't working, it's not going to work. So we're going to keep struggling forward, and hopefully whatever issues the stream is having will resolve itself. But the political education section of today's program, again, the first episode of 2022, has two parts. First, back in December, we conducted an interview with Mduduzi Simelane, who is president of the Swaziland Liberation Movement, SWALIMO. Swaziland has been engaged in a people's uprising against Africa's last absolute monarchy, and SWALIMO is one of the organizations on the front line of that struggle. So we'll be hearing from the president about what's going on, why they're fighting, and I'll also provide some historical context in just a moment. And then the second part of the political education section of today's program is going to be a mini report back from my trip to Cuba last week with the National Coordinating Committee of the Venceremos Brigade. The Venceremos Brigade is a solidarity delegation to Cuba, the oldest of its kind in the world. It is 51 years old. It has been traveling to Cuba, a project of U.S. citizens, particularly youth, traveling to Cuba and over 50 contingents to express solidarity with the Cuban Revolution. The NCC was in Cuba organizing the next upcoming Venceremos Brigade that's happening winter 2022. So I want to talk about what happened on that trip, what we learned, and what's going on with the 51st Venceremos Brigade. So that's what we're covering in PE today. Let's get into it by talking about SWALIMO. So some context. First of all, the way that we got connected to SWALIMO is a comrade whose family, his roots are in Swaziland, joined the work-study process in AAPRP Southwest. They are currently living in Utah. They filled out the information form on the AAPRP website. We were the closest chapter to the comrade, and so we were tasked with giving him his orientation and making him a part of our work-study. After he joined work-study and became engaged in the process, he also shared with us his involvement with the uprising against the monarchy in Swaziland. The protests have been continuing since the summer. They have been met with massive repression and violence from the monarchy. They are being treated basically as a security threat, and so our comrade connected us with the folks on the ground. They've been working with AAPRP to develop their organization, and they asked us if we could connect them to U.S. media sources that are controlled by African people, because they wanted to spread the word about why the people are rising up in Swaziland and how we as Africans in the diaspora can be in solidarity. So that's how we got linked up. One thing that we have learned quite a bit from them, have learned also quite a bit about the history of Swaziland and how we got to this point. But one important thing that we learned is that recently the monarch of Swaziland declared that the name of the nation would become Eswatini. But what the comrades from SWALIMO told us was that this was not a decision that was made democratically by the masses of people in that nation. It was in fact just the king saying this is the way it is now. And so the masses of people, as far as they're concerned, still call that nation Swaziland. So in other places, you might hear it referred to as Eswatini, but we on this program are going to call it Swaziland because that is what our comrades in SWALIMO told us they want us to call it, period. So Swaziland, Eswatini, same place. Swaziland is what the people call it. So SWALIMO, aka the Swaziland Liberation Movement, was founded in June of 2021 in the midst of the people's uprising for democracy and against the absolute monarchy in Swaziland. The movement began, or rather the people's uprising began, when members of Swaziland's parliament spoke out against the monarchy, spoke out against the absolute rule of the king, said that the people of Swaziland deserved a state that was organized for their benefit and not around the power of just one man. The movement describes itself as a democratic, mass-based liberation movement that campaigns for the advancement of democracy, human rights, equality, justice, safety, and dignity for the people of Swaziland. SWALIMO seeks to lead and support the struggle of all democratic and patriotic forces to eliminate the oppressive absolute monarchical system of government and replace it with a united democratic Swaziland, in which all the people shall govern and enjoy equal rights and freedoms collectively. Now, doesn't that sound like absolutely reasonable? Like, why is it that this one guy, regardless of whether or not he's a king, should decide how everybody else in the nation should live? Should say that no other organization that he does not control is allowed to exist. To say that they don't need democracy. Like, one guy for a nation of millions? That makes no sense. So the demands of this movement are absolutely reasonable. And the uprisings for democracy in Swaziland began peacefully. Unfortunately, the monarchy responded, as I said, by treating the people's uprising, the people's resistance, the people's demands for justice and equality as a security threat. They deployed state police forces that brutalized and maimed protesters and engaged in mass arrests. If folks remember, back in December, we showed that documentary produced by folks on the front line of the movement for democracy in Swaziland. It was called The Unthinkable, and it was a series of interviews with people who had either been brutalized by the police or with their family members that were looking for them. So that was just a taste of the kind of repression that African people in Swaziland are facing for rising up again simply for equality and democracy. They are fighting for a better Swaziland for everybody, and this absolute monarch is using state power to brutally repress them for doing so. He is saying they are threats to national security. And meanwhile, this very same king maintains ties with the U.S. military through AFRICOM. So the regular people of Swaziland fighting for justice are a security threat, but the military apparatus of the most dangerous empire in existence today is a friend. Makes no sense. So, like I said, demonstrations have been peaceful. They've been met with violence. They've been treated as a security threat, but the people are not demanding anything unreasonable whatsoever. In fact, what they are looking for is a better Swaziland for everybody. And if you don't believe me, they've actually been upfront about what it is they're asking for. SWALIMO has a website where they talk about the history of their organization, and importantly, they talk about the demands of their movement. I just put it in the chat. Hopefully that goes through. There we go. So the Liberation Charter you can read on SWALIMO's website. It lays out in detail the demands of the Swaziland liberation movement. And as you read through this, you're like, these are things that every person should have all around the world. Like, these are basic rights for a state that can be said to be called for the people rather than for the 1% or for just the king. For example, the very first demand of the Liberation Charter says the Swazi people shall lead. Why wouldn't they? It's their nation. All persons, irrespective of race, sex, color, or tribal affiliation, shall have the right to take part in the administration of the country. Makes perfect sense. Absolutely reasonable. In fact, the way a true democratic state should be organized. They say all bodies, both public and corporate, formed along royal blood, including advisory boards, council, and authorities, shall be fully reconstituted to be a full representation of the will of the people. They're saying you don't get to be in charge of us just because of who your daddy was. Absolutely not. We demand equal representation in our bodies of government and of the economy. That is completely reasonable. They say no one shall represent the people without the will of the people. The parliament shall be by the people, for the people, and of the people. The head of state shall be fully accountable to the people together with the elected cabinet of ministers. They are asking for a state that serves the people of Swaziland, not the interests of one family put in charge because of their blood. Completely reasonable demand for egalitarian society. The same thing, the second demand is the Swazi people shall share the country's natural resources. All Swazis shall have equal rights to trade according to their preference. All minerals in the state shall benefit the Swazi people and be transferred to all and shall be controlled to benefit the nation as a whole. All minerals in the state shall benefit the Swazi people and be transferred to all and shall be controlled to benefit the nation as a whole. They are saying we have these resources. We have this wealth. We should collectively and democratically control those resources. We should use the wealth generated from those resources for the good of the people. Completely reasonable. It's their land. It's their nation. Why wouldn't they have a say in how the state is organized and how the wealth is controlled? Why wouldn't they? So yeah, again, all Swazi shall enjoy freedom and equal rights. All shall enjoy decent public health and free education. There shall be houses, security, and transparent employment opportunities. shall be equal before the law, and none shall be above the law. There shall be peace and harmony. The police and military shall protect and defend the will of the Swazi people. There shall be decent monthly social grants for the elderly and persons living with disability. And there shall be recognition of traditional leadership structures and upholders of cultural customs and heritage. Again, I put the link to the SWALIMO, Freedom or Liberation Charter, in the chat. I encourage folks to check it out. Check out the demands of this movement. Understand how completely reasonable they are. And then think about, again, this absolute monarchy that willingly maintains ties with the U.S. empire through AFRICOM, treating people asking for these completely reasonable things as a threat to be brutally repressed, to be put down, to be met with violence and arrest and surveillance. It is unconscionable. It is, in fact, unthinkable. The people of Swaziland have every right to demand basic decency, to say that they should have a say in the way their nation is organized. They have every right to ask for this, to demand this, and to win this. So I just wanted to reinforce that even though these people are being attacked for what they're asking for, what they're asking for is just and would build a better nation for everyone. The other thing I want to say before I get into the interview with the comrade president, which was pre-recorded, is that the question of an African king and how Africans in the West, in particular, have like a romanticized view of African monarchy. Like I'm thinking about Beyonce's Black is King. I'm thinking about The Lion King. I'm thinking about Coming to America as like sort of like cultural markers of the way that we've been taught to think about monarchy as Africans in the West. I'm thinking about the obsession with Meghan Markle actually joined the British monarchy. I'm thinking about even in like the day-to-day when we call each other king and queen, there's like a particular way that Africans in the West think about monarchy in Africa that is sharply contrasted to the reality of what this monarchy in Africa looks like. Like the reality of a people saying we want to say in our own lives and a monarchy saying absolutely not, we will kill you till you shut up. So yeah, and the reason why I'm thinking about that is because in researching this segment of the program and sort of reading about perspectives on SWALIMO and on the King of Swaziland, I did see like Africans in the West being like, leave that man alone, and sort of like intimidating or intimating that he was like being targeted by the West because he was like the last African king or whatever. Like we have been taught deliberately a romanticized view of what monarchy means for African people. It's been pushed in the media, and it's sort of like it is like a clear symptom of like the individualist and materialistic mindset that capitalism deliberately spreads among oppressed populations. So yeah, like there's the contrast between how we African people in the West think about monarchy and the reality of monarchy in Africa is very interesting to consider. But like I said, we were granted an interview with the president of the Swaziland Liberation Movement, a comrade named Mduduzi Simelane, where he answered some questions about what SWALIMO is trying to do and why. So this is a pre-recorded interview done about a month ago. It's about 10 minutes long. I'm hoping that even if the video is choppy, that you will get the audio clearly. But let me know in the chat if you have any issues hearing or seeing, and I will play it right now. So greetings for the Political Education, a segment of Weekly Pan-African News. We're very excited to have a guest with us to give us some updates on the ground from the current People's Uprising for Democracy in Eswatini. We are very, very happy to have Mduduzi Simelane, who is a current member of Eswatini Parliament, who is now living in exile because of his support of that People's Uprising. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be part of this great moment, leadership.
And we are so proud and honored to have you on the program today. Let's jump into it and give our viewers some context. What can you tell us about the current situation on the ground in Eswatini? What's happening there and why?
Leader, Swaziland is going through a very tough time, a historic time. Swaziland is engulfed in a storm of political unrest resulting from the nation's dissatisfaction at the system of governance, the distribution and management of resources, political, social, and judicial injustice, that and many other oppressive challenges that weigh so heavily into the lives of the ordinary citizenry on the ground. It is really a hectic time. People are up and demanding their rights.
Can you tell me a little bit about how the current uprising started?
Yeah, let's first note that Swaziland is the last absolute monarch, I'll say so, in Africa. Number two, I want the world to understand that the king has control of almost over everything. Whatever he says, it goes. He lives a lavish lifestyle. Parliament cannot challenge his powers. The judiciary cannot challenge his powers. The executive cannot challenge his powers. So Swaziland, over 70% of the 1.2 million people are living under the poverty line. The situation is really so terrible. Service delivery in our country is so much a shame. The people have been looking at this thing for a long time. After some time, people realize that no, we really need to have a democratically elected government so that it can deliver to the people as per the mandate it is getting from them. So from there, we stood up in parliament. We voiced the people's views. Then the unrest started outside. People went all over the streets delivering petitions, demanding a government that is elected by the people. Then everything broke loose, I'll say so.
So what can be done in the region from the continent and from the diaspora to support the people's uprising in Swaziland?
Yeah, I think the only thing that needs to be done here, number one, the king must understand and accept that the people have a right to have an elected government. I mean, we can't have a country that is ruled. We need a country that is governed by the will of the people. That's number one. Number two, there should be a dialogue. We appreciate what SADC has done. We've seen Cyril Ramaphosa coming to Swaziland trying to talk to the king. We've been told that a dialogue is coming, but unfortunately, my leader, there is no practical commitment on the part of the king and his government that really they also believe in dialogue. If they were committed to that, I think by now they will have released the 2 MPs who by now are behind bars for speaking for our people. Myself, I'm here in exile. If they were serious about that, I would be back home by now trying to prepare for the incoming dialogue. Number three, by now, I think the king will have unbanned all the political parties and opened political space for people to share ideas and try shaping themselves towards the dialogue. And number four, lastly, I think international organizations should come in because it's very clear, judging from the body language of the king and the government, it's really very clear that they are not determined, they are not committed to the dialogue that they promised the Troika chairperson, who is President Ramaphosa, when they meet with the king. I think that's the only thing that can calm the situation. Actually, we want a dialogue that will be in a free environment, a dialogue that will be supervised by reputable international organizations to make sure that we come up with solutions that will be lasting, with solutions that will truly solve the mess that is currently unfolding as the government has killed over 80 people there. Over 200 people are walking with bullets. Over 500 have been thrown behind bars for rising to the streets and demanding their rights. And maybe the last one, I would love to say that the government has banned every public activity, everything you try in terms of sitting together and share ideas in the streets or making some kind of demonstrations. All those things have been banned because the government is trying to suffocate every dissenting voice from what they stand for.
So how can Africans outside of Swaziland support this call for international organizations to support the uprising?
We salute the effort that has been put by the international diaspora, the Swazis all over the world. They're really raising the alarm high. Thank you for that. But then I think we need more than that. We need all these reputable international organizations like the OAU, like the Commonwealth, the list goes on and on, to come over and assist us, because the government of Swaziland is very good in sending a wrong narrative. As you may know, that sometimes they switch down the internet so that when they kill the people, the world will not know outside what is really taking place down on the ground. So in short, I'm saying we are really pleading with the international community, the peace-loving people of the world, to come over and put some pressure on the Swazi government with regards to making sure that a true dialogue is coming, not this one that is said to be in the king's crawl, because we believe a true dialogue, no one should have a home ground advantage. It must be a neutral place. So far, the way we hear it, they're saying it's going to be in the crawl. The crawl is in the king's home. So actually, it's a religious place more than being a constitutional place. So I think that's what will assist the situation of Swaziland.
So the All African People's Revolutionary Party is a mass revolutionary Pan-African socialist party. Our political objective is Pan-Africanism. So how do you understand Swaziland's struggle for democracy to be connected to the struggle to build Pan-Africanism?
On a serious note, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. I would love to say that it would be wrong to look at the issue of Swaziland as an isolated problem. I just believe the king is living on the yesteryears, on the yester centuries. The king believes everything should be in his hands. We see this thing happening everywhere, maybe in Africa, but we just hope the people of Swaziland will rise against him in this situation, and the world will back up us in making sure that peace, justice flows and nourishes in our motherland.
Do you have any concluding remarks or things that you would like to promote so folks can learn more about what's going on in Swaziland and lend their support?
On my closing remarks, I would say it has been over 140 days having two MPs who stood for speaking for the people. They are now jailed. They've been there. It's now over 4 months, or over 80 people were butchered by the state. It's now over 5 months, around 500 people have been thrown behind bars for demonstrating. We are saying, please, to the world, to everybody, to the peace-loving people, may they please come close to Swaziland, may they assist us. The situation is really so bad. We just hope and believe that the coming dialogue, after the intervention of the world structures, the coming dialogue will then give us the true fruits that we are longing for, the fruits of justice, the fruits of peace, the fruits of a democratic government like any other countries of this world at this point in time.
Thank you so much for your time today. Once again, that was Mduduzi Simelane, a member of the Swaziland Parliament, currently living in exile, speaking on the People's Uprising for Democracy in Africa's Last Absolute Monarchy. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm back. So again, that was an interview with the president of the Swaziland Liberation Movement, aka SWALIMO, man named Mduduzi Simelane. He is a former member of Swaziland's parliament who was exiled from the country after he and two of his colleagues spoke out against police repression of the peaceful people's uprising. And one thing I forgot to mention in the contextual bit is that the uprising started because a law student who had been protesting was allegedly murdered by police. The members of parliament spoke out against police brutality. It was again treated as a security threat. The uprising spread, and an additional 46 people were murdered by Swaziland security forces. So at the root, or sort of like the catalyst for the people's movement that has now turned into like this broad call for economic and social reforms, began as a protest against police terrorism carried out by the monarchy of Swaziland. So we thank that comrade for that interview. Like I said, the All African People's Revolutionary Party is working with SWALIMO and other forces on the ground of the front lines of the people's uprising in Swaziland. And so we will most likely have additional interviews, additional content about what's happening in that nation on this program. But in the meantime, we encourage you to check out SWALIMO, read about that movement. We were just doing a presentation today about how you organize a work study circle and what kind of resources you should read together for political education. And the AAPRP is like super big on primary sources, meaning information coming directly from people directly involved. And so if you want to know what's happening on the ground in Swaziland, your best bet is not going to be capitalist media. Your best bet is not going to be the media sources of imperialism. Your best bet is going directly to the source. So please check out swalimo.com, SWALIMO.com. Also follow the Swaziland Liberation Movement on Facebook, and you can also follow them on Instagram. Their username is SWALIMO. So thank you so much for that, comrade, for doing that interview on our show. And we thank you for your comments in the chat. I did see a question come through from De El Sendero. Since all humans can trace their origins back to Africa, doesn't that make me of African descent too? I mean, technically, yes. The way that I put it, because this question comes up a lot, especially because we have on our sign-up form, we have like a column where you're like, are you African? And Europeans will oftentimes be like, well, didn't we all come from Africa? It happens a lot. And the way that I like to explain it is that while it is true that the origins of the human species are in Africa, only some of us are oppressed for being African. Only some of us. Now, when we say African as an identity, we're defining it politically as a revolutionary nationalist identity, not a biological identity. That's a broader conversation. However, the reality of the situation is that even though all of our roots are in Africa, only some of us are oppressed because we are Africans. As the clearest way I can explain it. And we should also do a program on what we mean by African being a political and national identity, because it's something that folks struggle to understand, coming from like a race, an understanding of African as a race. So we will do that later, but hopefully that answers your question. Anywho, so that was the SWALIMO portion of the PE. Next, let's move on to the Cuba report back portion of the PE. Like I mentioned last week, the very first week of the year, I was in Cuba with my other comrades on the National Coordinating Committee of the Venceremos Brigade. We're basically like representatives from different regions of the U.S. where the Venceremos Brigade is active that came together in this body to help coordinate VB work between brigades and also to help coordinate the brigades themselves. So the reason why we went to Cuba last week is because we are actively organizing the 51st Venceremos Brigade to Cuba, happening winter of 2022. The Venceremos Brigade has happened every single year for 50 years until last year when we missed it because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But because vaccines now exist and because Cuba in particular is kicking this pandemic's behind, we are confident that we can actually take folks from the U.S. to Cuba safely. And so now the 51st Brigade is on. And the brigades aren't something that the Venceremos Brigade just like unilaterally decides, like, this is what's going to be, this is who we're taking, this is what it looks like. The Venceremos Brigade is intimately coordinated with our Cuban partners. And the reason for that is because the entire purpose of the Venceremos Brigade is an act of direct solidarity with the Cuban Revolution. There's no possible way that we could be in any kind of meaningful solidarity with Cuba without the input of Cubans. It just wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. So the Venceremos Brigade program, we coordinate in close partnership with comrades on the island. And so our trip this past week was about having face-to-face direct conversations with our Cuban partners about what it is they wanted Americans or people living in the United States, who are not necessarily American, I'm not American, what they wanted U.S. citizens to know, what they wanted to make sure that we saw in the brigade, our goals for the brigade, what we wanted to see, as well as what are the primary objectives, or what should the primary objectives of the solidarity movement be in this particular time. So that's why we went. We were there from the 5th to the 9th. It was quite a fast trip. It was like almost too short. But like I said, I got back home and all hell broke loose. So I guess that was fine. And one thing to know about me is I went to Cuba for the very, very first time 2 years ago on the 50th contingent of the Venceremos Brigade. That was the very first time I ever went to Cuba. Before I went, I knew about Cuba's history of solidarity with the African liberation movement. I, of course, knew about Asada and the many dozens of revolutionary African people that found refuge in Cuba after they were repressed by the United States government for fighting for our people. I knew about Cuba's contributions to anti-colonial struggles for self-determination in Africa. They have sent, hundreds of thousands of doctors, teachers, soldiers. They sent funds, they sent medical supplies, they sent weapons, doctors, all kinds of things to help fight for Africa's liberation. And so knowing that history, I was like, I need to go to Cuba. I saw a postcard for the 50th Venceremos Brigade. I was like, I'm doing it. I was there for 2 weeks. It changed my life. It changed my life. I am not exaggerating. I thought before I went to Cuba that while I was an anti-imperialist, I went, I realized that I had no right to use that word because no, I was not. No, I was not. They just like hearing the perspective, like directly from the people who are experiencing it, of how the U.S. empire had moved systematically to attack this revolution, hearing about the biological warfare, hearing about these sponsors of acts of terrorism, like blowing up hotels and stuff, hearing about all of the things that Cubans cannot get because of the U.S. blockade, all of the ways they are restricted directly from Cubans, was a transformational experience. An additional transformational experience was learning about how they were so creative, so brilliant about always making a way. The U.S. puts up all these roadblocks. The U.S. carries out this genocidal, it is in fact an act of genocide, a genocidal blockade against Cuba, meant to make the Cuban people suffer, meant to make them want to overthrow their revolution. And the Cubans are like, no, we are not going to do that. And if you beat us down, we will always find a way to rise up. Understanding that this was a socialist nation. Like before I went to Cuba, I'm ashamed to say that these Maoists in the United States that are like, there's no existing socialist state, they got in my head, and I was like, well, maybe that's true. And then I went to Cuba, and every single Cuban I met was like, we are socialists, this is why. Could explain to you in great detail the process of building socialism and how it will produce communism. I was like, this random 23-year-old white kid in Austin, Texas is like, Cuba is not socialist. And in Cuba, there's like 10 million people being like, we're building socialism. I was like, oh my God, like the actual reality of socialist projects is so inspirational and such a sharp contrast to the vast confusion that exists in the discourse-centered, internet-centric U.S. left. Like, oh my God, I was like, these people have no idea what they're talking about. But anyway, it was a transformational experience. It was also an extremely well-organized delegation of over 150 people. Like, I was like shocked at how much like thought and consciousness went into developing that brigade. Like, we had months of prep work before we got to Cuba, because the organizers of the Venceremos Brigade were like, if we bring a bunch of people who have been living in the United States to a socialist country without any kind of preparation, these people are going to show their whole ass. So what we have to do is educate them about socialism, educate them about revolution, educate them about U.S. and Cuban relations, educate them about transformative justice, about queer liberation, lay a foundation so that the people can act right on a basic level, and we can at least get to the point where we are having deeper conversations about socialism and imperialism without having to deal with like basic bitch American behavior. It was like so incredibly well organized. I was like so impressed. And like on the last day of the brigade, one of the main VB organizers like sat next to me on the bus. It was like, so, and basically like recruited me. Like the thing about me is if you are organizing for social justice and you ask me directly to help, it's very hard for me to say no. I probably should not say that like on the feed, because when people start asking me for more stuff, I do a lot of stuff. But as soon as she was like, will you help? I had no choice. So ever since when we got back from the 50th, for the past over 2 years, I've been organizing locally with the Venceremos Brigade. And then last year, I was asked to join the National Coordinating Committee. And then now it is one of my main political homes alongside the AAPRP and Hood Communists. So, like I mentioned, the Venceremos Brigade is a over 50-year-old solidarity delegation to Cuba. It is one of the oldest delegations of its kind still in existence in the world. It was started by young U.S. citizens who saw what had happened in Cuba, who saw what their government was doing in response, and was like, we are going to be on the side of justice. They literally, on the very first brigade, hopped on like one of those, like, what's it called? The ships that take the containers, like one of those big ass ships, cargo ships, and took it to Cuba and worked alongside Cubans to harvest millions of pounds of sugar, because that was like an economic goal they needed to meet. So ever since then, the brigade has continued every single year, with the exception of last year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It has sent over 10,000 U.S. citizens to Cuba in 50 brigade contingents, and people from all kinds of social movements, from Black Lives Matter to DSA to all kinds of to passion organizations and church organizations to student groups, have traveled to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigade and seen the truth of the Cuban Revolution. And then we come back here and we become agents of Cuban solidarity. That's what happened to me. So yeah, that's the VB and a little bit of the history of the VB. And so in terms of what we did on our trip to Cuba last week, like I said, the purpose was to organize the 51st Brigade with our Cuban partners. We work primarily with ECAP, which is the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the Peoples. ECAP is so clutch. Like, oh my God. Like, when we got to Cuba, we realized that US dollars were useless because of the blockade. They can no longer accept US dollars. You can't actually even convert US dollars to Cuban currency anymore. You can only convert euros and Canadian dollars. So we had no money. And ECAP came through, fed us, housed us, took care of us, talked to us. Like, we had like an ECAP comrade, Alicia, young woman, 27, brilliant. Like, I talked to her about Puerto Rican national liberation, because she had wrote her thesis about it. And she was like hella militant. She was like, no, not statehood, not any kind of legislation in the US Parliament. No, like, the Puerto Ricans need their own liberation. They decide their relationship with the United States. I was like, damn, girl. So she was with us the whole time. And I'm sure that we are exhausting people coming from the United States, but we were able to like build with her, talk to her, engage with her. Also, all of these people speak multiple languages. They of course speak Spanish, but she was talking to us in fluent English. There were other ones that were speaking Mandarin, other ones speaking French. Like, all of these people speak multiple languages, because the purpose of ECAP, the work of ECAP, is to build strong and principled relationships with people's movements all over the world. There's a North American division of ECAP, which is who we work with, but there's also an African division, an Oceania division, which includes Australia and Asia. There's a European division. So all regions of the world have an ECAP division, and the workers of ECAP at each division will like learn about the culturally specific circumstances of the movements they were working with. They will learn the language, they will learn the history, they will learn the culture in order to work better with us. Like on the 50th, there were 3 indigenous comrades on the brigade. 2 of them came from Tiwa territory. And I remember they, like the ECAP comrades, engaged in like long and deep conversations with the indigenous comrades about the history of the United States, about the continued existence of indigenous peoples in this land. One of the comrades from Pueblo Action Alliance, Comrade Julio, who's been on the show before, gave one of the ECAP comrades a book about the 1680 Pueblo Revolt, which was an uprising that unified indigenous nations here in Tiwa territory against Spanish colonialism. They drove the Spanish out. So she gave him this book 2 years ago. And when I saw him last week, he was like, I read that book. It changed my life. Tell Julia to come back. They are working actively to learn the history of oppressed peoples in the regions they work with. Like the model of solidarity, they fed us, they housed us. We had no money. We were just stranded. They helped us out. And they are learning about African history. They are learning about indigenous history. They are learning our languages. They are learning our culture because they are trying to build with us. It is so remarkable, the model of Cuban solidarity, especially when I think about it in contrast to the most model of Western solidarity. It's pretty bad. So yeah, we were with ECAP the whole time. We had a comrade, Alicia, that was with us for the duration of the trip. We also got to see many cool, inspirational things in Havana. For example, they recently opened a museum dedicated to the history, the legacy of Fidel Castro, the Centro Fidel Castro Ruth in Havana. It is a museum that is housed in a mansion that was expropriated by the Cuban Revolution. They took it back from the previous owner. The previous owner fled Cuba after the revolution in 1959. The Cuban Revolution took the house. They made it a free museum for Fidel Castro. It's pretty cool. Folks may know that Cuba, Fidel Castro always spoke about how he wanted to avoid a cult of personality, and so that's why when you go to Cuba, you don't see statues of Fidel, you don't see plaques or anything commemorating Fidel. You might see his face on a poster that an individual person put up, but you don't see state monuments to Fidel Castro. They shared that this museum was an intentional exception to that principle. And the reason why they wanted to do it is because the new generation, the folks who are going to be born after Fidel had passed, need to know the truth about this man. So many lies are spread about Fidel Castro by the capitalist and imperialist system. In the United States, for example, we hear constantly that he was a dictator, that he was a despot, all kinds of bald-faced lies. And so unless the Cuban Revolution is intentional about telling the truth about who Fidel was, about what he believed, about what he is trying to do, there is a chance that even within Cuba, the truth about him will be lost over the years. And so the Centro Fidel Castro Ruth is a space to honor the truth about Fidel. They said we are intentionally anti-dogmatic. We are just presenting history and primary documents so people can make their own decision. But it's an intentional space about the truth about Fidel. So we saw that. It was really cool. It was also extremely high tech. I might put up some pictures on the AAPRP Southwest Instagram later. It was just very impressive. There was touch screens everywhere. There was a global map, a map of the world showing all of the spots, hundreds of spots where Cuba had engaged in acts of international solidarity. There was a room dedicated to Fidel Castro's life that had baby pictures and little kid, little 4-year-old Fidel, all the way up until his last years. There was a room where you could listen to snippets of his speeches. It was just a really great experience, a really grounding experience. And again, coming from a context where people lie on this man constantly, it was so refreshing and healing to be in a space that was just telling the truth. So that was the Fidel Castro Center. Also, the VB was in it. There was in the map of Cuban international solidarity and Cuban and international relations, there was a section of the U.S. part that talked about the Venceremos Brigade, and I was that's right. But it was cool. We also went to a satellite office of BioCuba Pharma, which is the Cuban nationally owned biotechnology company that has manufactured all 5 of Cuba's COVID vaccines. There are 3 that are currently being distributed, and then 2, including the nasal vaccine, that are still in trials. I think it's Soberana Plus, and Abdala are the 3 that are currently being distributed. So when you hear about 87% of Cuba's population being fully vaccinated, meaning vaccinated and boosted, they're getting Abdala, Soberana, and Soberana Plus. And then the nasal one, and I forget the other name of it, the other name, are still in trials. So they talked about the development of those vaccines. They talked about Cuba's COVID response. And actually, let me take a moment to talk about how different the handling of COVID is in Cuba. Because I was like, in the United States, it's a hot mess. They gave up. To be frank, they gave up like 2 years ago. We're now just like, they're not just being open about it. But like, even like they experienced, like in order to travel to Cuba from the United States, you need a negative PCR test that you've taken within 72 hours of your departure. We had comrades traveling from New York. I was traveling from New Mexico. Also one traveling from Washington, one from Florida. And the experience of finding a test within that window was so stressful because you cannot find COVID tests reliably in the United States right now. Like the comrades in New York signed up for a test, took the test, heard they would not get results for 5 to 7 days. So they found another test, paid like $150 to get the rapid results. They were like, sorry, we usually have the results in 24 to 48 hours. It's going to be a week. So then they got to the airport and took the COVID test in the airport. And then by chance, they were able to rush the results through and get them in time. Same deal with the comrade in Washington. The comrade in Florida had to wait in line 6 hours to get their COVID test. So getting a COVID test to travel out of the United States is very, very stressful. Now imagine if you're one of those people that get tested every single week for work, which I have many comrades who are in that position. You cannot find a test in the United States right now. So-called first world nation. Then, when we went to Cuba, in order to get into Cuba, you must have that negative PCR test result. It cannot be the rapid test, the antigen test. It must be the PCR. And then to get into Cuba, you must prove that you have been vaccinated. Like I had to have my vaccine card. So you cannot travel to Cuba unless you have been fully vaccinated. So they check you at the door. Like you can't even make it out of customs without showing your card. So yeah, we showed them the PCR test. We showed them the vaccination card. We got our visa. We were able to enter. In the airport, they got doctors walking around checking your temperature, doing random checks of people's temperature. When larger groups of travelers come in, they do random rapid tests in the Cuban airport. Then, when we were traveling throughout the country, everybody was wearing a mask. I did not see not one person, except one time when we were walking around, we were wandering the streets of Havana at like 1 a.m. and there was like a guy across the street with no mask because no one else was around. Otherwise, the entire time we were there, every single person was wearing a mask 100% of the time. 100% of the time. It was no question. Before we were traveling back to the United States. Oh yeah, and then also when you enter buildings, whether it's like we went to like a school, we went to a bakery, we went to the Fidel Castro Center, we went to the MLK Center, we're going to talk about in a second. So you were traveling throughout these places, and every time you go into a building, whether it's a government building or not, someone sprays your hand with hand sanitizer. And like has you like, every single time we went to a building, we got our hands sprayed with hand sanitizer, and we had to like wipe off our feet on a sanitizing mat, and we had to keep our masks on. When we were preparing to travel back to the United States, we were taken to a polyclinic in Havana. We were given our rapid tests so we could go, we would know we were negative before going back to the United States. Guess how long that test took? We waited in line for like 15 minutes and the test took like 5 minutes. It was like the old school, like remember the beginning of the pandemic when they like stick thing up your nose and it's like touching your brain? That's how the lady did it. The African lady doctor did it to me. It was kind of rough, but 15-minute wait, 5 minutes for results. I was like, oh my God. Like, it's just like the way Cuba does it is so organized and clearly centered on the well-being of the Cuban people. And then you think about the US where you can't even get a test, where if you do get a test, it's going to be like at least $20. Like, it's just like, Jesus Christ. Like, can we smash capitalism? Like, this is terrible. This is terrible. And like less than 100 miles off the southeast coast of the United States, there's like a much better example. We were talking to the scientists in Cuba Pharma, and they were like, we think that Cuba's going to be able to eradicate COVID in 3 months. The Cuban scientists think that the Cubans will be able to eradicate COVID on the island in 3 months. It's not going away in the United States. And the only difference is the complete and drastic capitalist-driven mismanagement of the pandemic. Like, it could be so much better. I felt safe. I felt taken care of. I was like, if I'm positive and I got a quarantine, I would actually like to stay long. Like, I was just like, it was like so different. It's so different. It's so rational and life focused. So yeah, we checked out Cuba Pharma. They talked to us about the development of COVID vaccines. We experienced a rational and life-centered COVID response. Man, and it was hella cute. They took us to like the San Isidro neighborhood where they attempted a color revolution just to like show us the reality of the neighborhood. And it was so cute, like watching the Cubans like interact with each other, like seeing the new normal, because Cuba had been on lockdown for like a long time. November is when they opened up. Like just this past November, Cuba opened up. Before that, folks were locking down, and so you can see like the relief in being able to interact with each other, but you can also see people being like really careful and like really conscious of like the new circumstances, the new rules. So, like if someone has like their mask like below their nose, like people like tap and be like, pull it up, Carmen. People are like, where can I get some bleach? Like just like really wholesome new normal. Like they understand it's still a pandemic, but they're excited to be out in the community again, and they have earned it because Cuba took the pandemic seriously. The Cuban people moved collectively to make sure that they could control the spread. Now they have their own vaccine that over 80% of the population has, and now they can slowly get back to normal in a rational way. Oh yeah, and by the way, Cuba did not open schools for children until the children were vaccinated. Cuban schools did not open until November 15th after children were vaccinated. We told our comrades at ECAP, the United States opened schools before the kids were vaccinated, and they were like, they were horrified. They were horrified. So yeah, we checked out San Isidro neighborhood. We checked out the Fidel Castro Center. We went to Cuba Pharma. And so some context about the Venceremos Brigade is that it's a very young Cuba Solidarity delegation, one of the youngest in existence. Like the Cuba Solidarity movement in general is largely made up of like down-ass elders. Like down-ass people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And there's like the BB who's like in their teens, 20s, and 30s. We're like, ah! So it's like a lot of young people, a lot of African and colonized people, a lot of queer and trans people are on the Venceremos Brigade. So when we talk about like designing a brigade and designing a program, we want to make sure that people's identities are respected, that we're using the right pronouns, that folks like understand like gender variance and what that means, so on and so forth. So this is like a new topic, especially like explaining it to them in English, because certainly there are like queer and trans and like LGBTQ people in Cuba. We've met them, we work with them. But when it's like American, like people coming from the United States, explaining in English these concepts, oftentimes there's like a disconnect. So the reason why we went to the MLK Center is one, because it is a community organization. Like you go in and it feels like a community center in an ungentrified neighborhood. Like it has a great vibe. And the work of the Martin Luther King Center, which was founded by, I'm sorry I forget his name, but he's Gail Walker's husband. He just passed. Gail Walker is I believe the executive director of Pastors for Peace. So her husband, an African man, helped found this center in Cuba. And the work of the MLK Center is basically to work with the masses of people in Cuba to make them active agents of the revolution. So they're heavily involved in ongoing debates about the upcoming the new Cuban Family Code that's going to be debated over the next few months. In that new family code, there's new laws about like the recognition of same-sex couples and marriage. There's new laws about allowing queer and trans people to adopt kids. There's more laws about gender confirmation and gender affirmation for trans community members. So it's like a big change. And it's not going to happen like unilaterally. It's going to be debated and discussed with the Cuban people over the course of the next few months. And so the MLK Center is helping to facilitate those conversations among the people, but also among faith communities, churches in Cuba, because Pastors for Peace, of course, it's in the name. It's like a religiously based organization in the United States. So this is the work they do. And so we were like, how do we talk about like queer and trans liberation in like a culturally specific way, in a way that like makes sense to Cuban people? Like, how do y'all talk about this so we can do it too? Because we can, like, it's easy, relatively easy, to have that conversation in a way that U.S. citizens understand, because we're U.S. citizens. So when we have conversations about pronouns, it's clear how to explain it in a way that most people will get. But we don't want to come with U.S. ideas about those concepts and expect Cubans to understand them. We want to understand, like, we want to explain it in Spanish. We want to explain it in a culturally specific way. So that's what we were talking about. So that was really cool. It was like an open, easy conversation with these like really badass women organizers. They shared like articles, they wrote about it, about the question, they talked about how they explain it. They talked about the importance of like sharing experiences, because Cubans are like a highly empathetic people. So if you're like, this is my experience as a trans person, this is why pronouns are important, this is why bathrooms are important, like they'll empathize. So yeah, that was the intent of that meeting. And it was very, very productive. It was hella cool. And yeah, I'm like a big fan of talking to people in a way they understand. Like, not expecting, because I think that something is morally correct, that people will automatically get it, but rather doing the work to understand how you can explain things in ways that are not like imposing, that are not like just, you know, more Americans coming, I'm not an American, but you know what I'm saying, that are more US citizens coming to Cuba telling them what to do. No, like, talk to them about it in a way they understand. Hopefully that makes sense. Oh yeah, and then the comrade's name is Lucius Walker. Thank you, Sai. So Lucius Walker is the founder of the Martin Luther King Center. So yeah, that's what we did. So we had that meeting. It was great. We had a number of other meetings, but I'm not trying to blow up the spot because, you know, the U.S. government frowns upon visits to Cuba and certain conversations to Cuba. So we don't have to go into detail. But suffice it to say, it was a very productive, very emotional trip to Cuba. I definitely cried one time. And it was great. And on that trip, we determined that the 51st Venceremos Brigade to Cuba is going to be happening in winter of 2022. It's either going to be November of 2022 after the U.S. midterm election, so after November 15th, or it's going to be December of 2022 after December 26th, probably to around January 6th or so we can be there for the anniversary of the revolution. So winter 2022 is when the brigade is happening. We are also planning to send some Venceremos Brigade delegates on the May Day Brigade that happens for International Workers' Day in May. So I'm going to be traveling to Cuba multiple times this year. Quite excited. For the folks that are interested in traveling to Cuba with the 51st Brigade in winter of 2022, we are actively organizing it now. Applications usually open about 6 months before the brigade leaves. So probably around like spring, summer of 2022 is where you can expect to see that application on the Venceremos Brigade website. So stay tuned for that. And certainly we will keep you updated on all of the new confirmed things about the 51st Brigade. But basically it is happening, y'all. We are trying to take at least 75 people to Cuba with the 51st Brigade winter 2022. And we are focusing on recruiting people who are active in political organizations, active in social justice movements in the United States. And the reason for that is a couple reasons. First, because when you bring someone who is part of a movement on an experience like the brigade, that person can act as a seed. They go to Cuba, they learn from the Cuban Revolution, they go back to their movement in the United States, and they spread the word, they spread the truth. So that one person can go on back to the United States and maybe influence like 10, 20 people. Share the truth about Cuba with their whole community. So that's why, excuse me, it's ideal for us to get people active in organizations. Like I for example, am an example of that. Like if you have known me for the past 2 years, I have talked to you at length about Cuba. At length. In my organizing here in Tiwa territory, I am constantly pushing people to learn about Cuba, to be in solidarity with Cuba. So I was very much a seed, and now I'm recruiting like probably a dozen people to go back to Cuba with me. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to replicate that model, like people organizers as seeds that will spread the truth about Cuba to their movements. The second thing is just that, you know, it's an international trip. It's large. It's a bunch of strangers. You know, people got problems. Capitalism teaches us particular ways of being, which are antisocial, which are anti-human, which can sometimes be harmful, even abusive. And when it comes to accountability for things like that, when it comes to engaging in processes of meaningful transformative justice, oftentimes it's much easier to engage a person in a process like that and to address that kind of behavior if they are accountable to someone else besides you. Like if I just met you and I'm like, I need you to be accountable for this, depending on who you are, you might be like, sure, or you might be like, get out of my face. But if it's like people you know who are like, dog, you got to deal with this, it works a lot better in my experience. So that's another part of the reason. So yeah, we are actively recruiting folks who are members of organizations, members of movements to join the 51st Brigade, but we are not turning people away if you are not active in an organization. So when those applications open up, if you're a member of an organization and you want to go, please do. If you're not a member, still sign up. Still sign up. Like some of the folks who were on the 50th had no main political home, but were recruited to help organize with the Venceremos Brigade. So maybe that will be your journey. Or maybe you can just go, see it, and then come back and tell the truth, and that's all you do. Either way, it's fine. So applications for the 51st Brigade will be open later this year. That 51st Brigade is happening winter of 2022. We are actively designing the program. We are seeking to bring at least 75 people to Cuba, primarily focusing on recruiting members of active members of organizations. So it should be great. I'm very excited. This will be my first time. Like I've organized delegations before, like for the AAPRP 50th anniversary and for the Oregon chapter trips to Ghana and Tanzania, but they were like small. It was like 3 to 4 people. It's gonna be like 75 plus people. So I'm very excited for the challenge and also like learn some new skills, more movement skills, more organizing skills, and like level up. And I am very sure there will probably be like drim dram and conflict, and I'm excited for that too, because it's all an opportunity for growth. But most of all, I'm excited to take 75 new people to see Cuba, to learn about Cuba, and to inspire them to come back and tell the truth about the Cuban Revolution, because that's the whole point of the Venceremos Brigade. We're going to continue the delegations until the U.S. blockade on Cuba falls, and until all attempts by the U.S. government to overthrow the Cuban Revolution end, period. So yeah, that's the Cuba report back. What are you people saying? There's a lot of stuff. Deborah reporting that you paid $105 for a COVID test. Yeah, and I also read this morning that the Biden administration like passed some guideline that said if you have health insurance, you can be reimbursed for the cost of a COVID test. But if you don't have health insurance or you're on Medicare or Medicaid, you will not be reimbursed. So basically, the poorest people have to pay out of pocket for their COVID tests in the United States. Makes perfect sense. No, it doesn't. What else? At work, someone asked me why I was wearing a mask yesterday. The same person asked me why I was sanitizing my hands before I ate lunch. That's rough. And that's someone speaking from the UK. Yeah, man, like it's just like when I had to fly from Albuquerque to Atlanta, and then Atlanta to Miami, and then Miami to Cuba. And on the flight from Atlanta to Miami, the flight attendant got on the speaker when we were boarding, and you could tell like she'd been through it. She was like, you have to wear your mask. It has to cover your nose. If it doesn't cover your nose and mouth at all times, you will be removed from the plane. Like you could tell this woman had been through some things with the people of Florida, and she was like over it. She was like, if you play with me, you're getting off the plane. And the fact that that's still where we're at in the United States because of the mismanagement at all levels of this pandemic by the people in power is like very unfortunate. Like the people working in like the front, like the service industry, like having to interface with people 24 hours a day, 365, like I do not envy those people because they are having to pay the price for how drastically the people in power have mismanaged COVID in the United States. Like from the confusion that people have about masks and vaccines, to the lack of available tests, to the lack of healthcare access for the majority of the U.S. population, like it's just a hot mess. And it's people who are not paid enough to deal with that who are being forced to deal with it. Let me see. Conversations about tests, blah, blah, blah. Great report back from Cuba. Love learning what folks on the ground are doing in Cuba to continue working on the socialist project. Absolutely. Anyone know of any organizing for support for Cuba going on in the DC area, car caravan support or the like? Ask Ricky Ryan. The Black Alliance for Peace people were outside the U.S. Embassy in Washington, D.C. like a couple months ago. Turn it up. So I don't know personally, but I know there's DMV people in the chat right now, and I hope y'all can connect. So yeah, that was the mini report back from the trip to Cuba I took. Actively organizing the 51st Venceremos Brigade. Very, very excited to bring additional folks to Cuba, including some of you in the chat. I hope that some of y'all want to go. Please come. You can meet me in person. You can see Cuba. You can learn about transformative justice. It's going to be lit. So let's keep it moving because it's been like 90 minutes. I'm tired. I'm getting stuffed up. So I do want to check in briefly about the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically the Omicron variant, what's going on in the United States. Like I have said repeatedly, these people do not know what they're doing. They gave up. They're letting people die. They keep saying Omicron is mild while the hospitals are filling up and the deaths are stacking. It's terrible. It's a hot mess. So first and foremost, at this point in the pandemic, N95, KN95, what's the other one? KF95. Basically like the better sort of mask is needed at this particular point in time. Thankfully, at this point in the pandemic, there are no longer the mass shortages of that kind of equipment that we saw in the beginning. You can fairly easily go online and buy an N95 mask at this point, assuming you have the funds, which is a big assumption. So if you do have those funds or you have access to someone that can help you out, the N95 mask is the wave at this point. The N95 mask. And here's a good article about that. One second. So if you can find them, any version of that please get one. Also, oopsies, that's the wrong link. That's the SWALIMO link. Hold on. It's so hard to type and great. Okay, so that link is in the chat. A popular science article talking about why we should be wearing N95 masks at this point. So like a cloth mask, a surgical mask is like better than nothing. Like please wear a mask. If you can't get an N95, that will work. But if you can't get an N95, like please wear those. Like when I was traveling, that's what I wore. Wearing a mask with glasses sucks. It sucks, but it is necessary. And I did not catch COVID. I really thought this was going to be it. I was like, I'm flying on a plane. I'm going to Florida. This is it. But I didn't catch it. I tested negative in Cuba and I tested negative when I got back. So yeah, and I was wearing an N95 mask. So at this point, please, if you can get them, please wear them. Also, even if you are vaccinated and boosted, please understand that you still have to be careful. You still have to wear your mask. You still have to sanitize your hands. You still have to social distance. Please do not listen to these people. Like remember back in May when Joe Biden said be vaccinated or wear a mask? That was the most foolish, one of the most foolish statements of this entire pandemic. That man was wrong, particularly with Omicron, but also with Delta. Breakthrough infections are happening. Vaccinated and boosted people are catching and spreading COVID. The risk of hospitalization is decreased if you are vaccinated and boosted. But based on what folks I know many people who have caught COVID, vaccinated and boosted. Like I have known more people with COVID now than at any other point in the pandemic. And the folks I know who have gotten the breakthrough infections, they were not hospitalized, but they were not okay. It was rough. They were sick for a long time. They are experiencing consequences afterwards. So please understand it is serious. You still have to be careful. Even if you aren't worried about yourself, be worried about the vulnerable people around you, about our elders, about disabled folks, about kids. Like, please be careful because they keep saying Omicron is mild, but people are getting very, very sick, even if they are vaccinated and boosted. Also, like I said, getting a COVID test in Cuba was simple as heck. It took a total of 20 minutes to get results. Here in the United States, we are seeing massive shortages of all kinds of tests, long waits for tests in most parts of the country, people charging opportunistic prices, hoarding tests, and charging people like very high prices to get access to them. In terms of the types of tests that are available, for international travel, you need a PCR test. Rapid or antigen tests are more widely available. PCR tests are generally more accurate, but the guideline, my understanding, is that if all that's available, take the rapid test. A rapid test is better than no test if you need to be tested, particularly if you're going to be vulnerable people. But understand, with the rapid test, if you get a positive result, you can trust that result. If you get a negative result, it could be a false negative. So with a PCR test, the positive and negative result, you can trust it's accurate. With the antigen test, trust the positive, don't necessarily trust the negative. You can test negative on an antigen test and then later take a PCR test and be positive. So take the test that is available, especially if you're going to see a vulnerable person. Like, take the test, the antigen test right before you see them. But understand, it is more accurate for positive results. False negatives are a real possibility. So have a backup plan. Keep wearing your mask and social distance. Also, the rhetoric, the discussion, the rhetoric, the messaging about Omicron in the capitalist media has been repeatedly reiterating that it's mild, it's mild, it's mild. But we are seeing, despite this so-called mildness, increasing numbers of hospitalizations and deaths, and people who are getting it reporting that it's very bad. And I want to say, I don't understand how there's such a thing as mild COVID. Because even when they were saying Omicron is mild, they were saying, except if you have so-called comorbidities, except if you are disabled, except if you are an elder, except if you are overweight, or if you have diabetes, or etc. So, a lot of people, for millions of people that have those so-called comorbidities, Omicron was still deadly. But in all the messaging about this variant, which they claim took them by surprise, even though scientists have been saying for years that variants are going to keep coming because the Western world failed, they were acting like all those millions of people for who would be severe didn't matter. All of the media messaging, the capitalist media messaging about COVID is focused on so-called able-bodied people, all those millions of kids, pregnant people, elders, disabled people, don't matter. They're just disposable. To me, if millions of people are at risk of death because they have these additional complications, then it doesn't actually count as mild. It doesn't. If millions of people could still die, that's not mild. You're basically just saying it don't fucking matter. Excuse my language. So that has bothered me from the very beginning. One, because people started saying it before the data was even there to make it clear that it was actually more mild, and it's still not clear that it's actually more mild. But second of all, because more mild for able-bodied people is still deadly for millions of other people. So how is that mild? If people are still dying, it's not mild. You should not just let it spread out of control like all these other people are disposable. They were just trying to get people to shut up and accept mass death. That's all the messaging is about. Fauci's everybody's gonna get it, don't worry about it. No. Worry about it. Be careful. Wear your mask. Get vaccinated. Get tested if you're gonna see vulnerable people. Do not take it for granted that we're all going to get it. I don't want to get it. I don't want my grandma to get it. I don't want my mom to get it. I don't want my disabled friends to get it. So I'm going to be careful because they're not disposable to me. Makes me mad. And then the other thing is that the so-called mild cases of COVID, an increasing number of studies are examining so-called long COVID, where even with so-called mild cases, there are lingering symptoms, lingering complications that last for much longer than the actual viral infection itself. Things like cognitive damage, Things like cardiac damage, serious complications like exhaustion, serious complications that people are experiencing even after they recovered from a so-called mild case of COVID. So again, what is mild COVID under these circumstances? A bald-faced lie. And this is why people are throwing around the word eugenics, because the stated policy of the U.S. government toward this variant and towards COVID in general is basically saying that a significant segment of the U.S. population is disposable. That is how they are responding, and it's disgusting. And we should not accept it, nor should we repeat it. So yeah. At this point, the U.S. has given up on trying to control COVID-19. Truth be told, they gave up like 2 years ago. A lot of lying happened during the 2020 presidential election. Joe Biden promised $2,000 checks, mass testing, contact tracing, like an actual coherent COVID response. He got into office and he basically put it all in the vaccine and said, fuck everything else. We're not locking down. We're not vaccinating kids before opening schools. We're not doing these contact tracing. We're not going to prepare for the holidays by making sure that we have more the tests available for mass testing. Like, he did nothing. He bald-faced lied to get into office, and then he dropped the ball as hard as possible. As hard as possible. Just bald-faced lied. Oh my God. Like, when 2024 hits, I need people to have some reflection, engage in some dialectical and historical materialist analysis of this particular moment, so you stop doing that lesser evil stuff, because clearly what we are living through is not a lesser evil. It's not a lesser evil. We have to understand that it doesn't matter who is in that Oval Office, who is in the White House. It does not matter whether it's the blue guy or the red guy. It doesn't matter who is the figurehead. It is the system itself, the capitalist imperialist system, that guarantees this devastating outcome, that guarantees that we will be abandoned during pandemics and natural disasters. It doesn't matter who the face is. The system does not change. You cannot save us from fascism. You cannot save us from pandemics. You cannot save us from climate change, from natural disasters, from all the consequences of capitalism by changing out the figurehead, by changing out the face. You have to destroy the system itself. It didn't matter if it was going to be Trump or Biden. We were fucked either way. We don't have to be. If we understand collectively that we have to go for the system, that it's not about the figurehead, it's about the system, then we can stop the fuckness. But until we understand that as a collective, it's a hamster wheel. It's just switching out one asshole for another asshole in perpetuity. Well, I'm tired. I'm tired of that. So please, in 2024, do that dialectical and historical materialist analysis, or if you don't want to do that, leave me alone. All the people that are not going to vote for either the Republican or the Democrat, instead of like berating them for months, just leave us alone. Let's do our work while you do the useless thing. How about that? So yeah, I talk a lot about how Hurricane Katrina was a warning of what was to come for the masses of people when catastrophic climate change hit. Hurricane Maria and the devastation in Puerto Rico was another warning. COVID-19 is yet another warning of how these people will respond when millions of lives are at risk. They are letting us know openly and unapologetically that they are going to let us die. Blue guy, red guy, doesn't matter. They are going to abandon us. The only hope we have is ourselves. The only hope we have is a militant people's movement to build the kind of pandemic and natural disaster and climate change response needed to ensure our survival. They are not going to do it. It doesn't matter who's in there. It's up to us. No one's coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. So that's the only way out, y'all. It's the system. It's not the person in there. And speaking of these raggedy Democrats, the blue guys, I recently read an article yesterday, as a matter of fact. Hillary Clinton frequently comes out crawling out of somewhere to say some nonsense. So the other day, she was like, these progressives need to be less radical so we can win the midterms. First of all, the Republicans are going to win the midterms. And in 2024, they're going to win the White House, the House, in the Senate. Like, I hope you know that. I hope you know that. Like, I hope you didn't hear Hillary Clinton say, stop talking about defund the police and universal health care so we can win, and believe that she actually believes that. The Democrats don't do that, and they do it like every election. Every single election, they're like, can you left people stop being so left so we can defeat the very mean Republicans? And then as we defeat the very mean Republicans, the Democrats get in there and do Republican shit. So at this point, you should understand they're not saying that so they can win. They're saying that to demobilize you. They're saying that to de-radicalize you. They're saying that to narrow the window of acceptable political activity and analysis so that it's only right-wing shit, only pro-ruling class shit that's allowed. They want you to believe that the only option you have is to vote and work within the ruling class system. And so if you're talking about abolishing the police, if you're talking about healthcare for all, if you're talking about closing all the U.S. military bases, they want you to shut the fuck up. Shut up. They don't want your ideas spreading. They don't want any kind of movement demanding that. They want any movement that exists to be centered around Democratic Party politics. So they are not, like Hillary Clinton did not say, stop being so progressive because she actually cares about winning the midterms. Because regardless of who's in there, the Democrats and the Republicans are going to unite on the ruling class agenda and on imperialism. They can figure out a way to work together when it actually matters to their bosses. So she's not saying it because they actually care about winning. She's saying it to stop you from fighting back. So I don't want to hear anyone say to me, stop being so radical in the midterms. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. It's the system. It's not who's in power, which ruling class party. It is the system itself that's the problem. So I'm not going to stop saying defund the police. I'm not going to stop saying everybody deserves health care. I'm not going to stop saying U.S. out of everywhere because Hillary Clinton told me to. I do not take strategy tips from Hillary goddamn Clinton. And neither should you. They do this every time. And so many of us fall for it and get nothing to show for it. Like, oh my God, the largest mass mobilization in history during the George Floyd protest, all of that energy was redirected into voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and then look at where we're at. Like, look at where we're at. What did we get? What was the verdict? How was the crisis ended? They tricked you. Please do not fall for it again. Please don't. Please. No matter who is in there, Democrat, Republican, it is the system itself that's the problem. It is the capitalist imperialist system that is the fundamental cause of our suffering. Until that system is destroyed, it doesn't matter who is in power, who is in charge of it. It's going to keep getting worse. Democrats cannot make any of this better. They don't even have the will to. It is the system itself creating these problems. It is the system that we have to attack and overthrow and replace. Period. It's going to keep getting worse until we take on that system. And that's a fact. So leave me alone. When the midterms come, leave me alone. In 2024, leave me alone. Until you people do that dialectical material historical analysis, that criticism, self-criticism, leave me alone. Stop pushing people. Stop harassing people into trying to do failed strategies. So annoying. Okay. That's all I wanted to say about that. What are you saying? Supreme Court just blocked vaccine mandates for work. Oh my God. Stop the fuckness. Hashtag stop the fuckness. Okay. Accept healthcare workers. What are y'all saying? Now I'm just looking to Cuba, Vietnam, China, etc. I'm going to do whatever they're doing when it comes to this pandemic because it's working for them. Absolutely. It's like, if you say China handled the pandemic well, I feel like someone will like pop out of the closet and be like, no, you're lying. But the fact of the matter is that China handled the pandemic well. Cuba handled the pandemic well. Vietnam handled the pandemic well. They did so much better than all of these capitalist countries. So much better. Their people are taken care of. Their economies are centered around life. They're providing solidarity to the rest of the world. So clearly, those are some examples that we need to learn from, regardless of what capitalist propaganda says. Absolutely agree with you, T. Democrats are some slick MFs. I agree. They have tricked so many people, including on the left. Pelosi said they need strong Republicans. Nancy Pelosi sucks, but she is like one of the most masked off Democrats in that she didn't even try to hide the allegiance to the ruling class. Like, she will openly say I'm a capitalist. She openly say I don't want a socialist United States. She like attacked like wild ass Bernie Sanders, like went for his neck. Like, she is a clear soldier for the U.S. bourgeoisie. Recall the food processing workers Trump sent back to work at the height of the pandemic a couple of years ago. Capital comes first, always. Absolutely. That's why, like, schools around the country have thousands of COVID-19 infections, and Joe Biden is still saying we got to keep the schools open. Like, they don't care. It's not that it's actually safer for kids to be in school in the middle of the pandemic. It's because they want the parents of those kids to go to work. That is why schools are open. They don't actually care if you live or die. They just want the machine to keep going. They want the money to keep printing. They want the capital to keep accumulating. And it doesn't matter if it's on your dead body or not. So that is correct. Let me see. DOJ dropping more repression via the domestic terrorism unit. Absolutely. They even openly said they're going for a so-called Antifa, like it's an organization, not a movement. So yeah. Whew. All right, y'all. Let's wrap this up so I can blow my nose. My nose is like, when I talk a lot, I get like stuffed up. Why? But this has been Weekly Pan-African News. We do this show on the second and fourth Thursday of every single month, which means we'll be back on the last Thursday of January for the next edition of the program, 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Please join us. Also, this coming Saturday, we are going to do the rescheduled January edition of the Pan-African Film Series. Due to technical difficulties, we were not able to do it last Saturday, so instead we're doing it this Saturday at 2 p.m. Mountain Time. We're going to be showing a documentary actually about Cuba's response to COVID-19. So if you want to learn about how to handle COVID-19 in a rational way, in a convenient 50-minute format, please join us on Saturday for that screening and discussion. It should be a good time. Also want to end by saying, please, if you are not active in an organization fighting for justice, please join an organization. We are disorganized, demobilized, de-radicalized here in the United States. Our movements are in a shambles at the precise moment where millions of people need an alternative. We need a higher level of organization here in the belly of the beast. And the way that we can get that is to join organizations fighting for justice, even if they're not perfect, even if they have to be like whipped into shape. It's better than being off by yourself, not making any kind of contribution. And if the organization that you want to see, that you believe in, does not exist, then you can start your own organization. You do not need permission. You just need some friends and a shared objective and a shared theory of change. So join an organization fighting for justice. Build an organization if the one you see does not exist. I want to thank you so much for joining us for Weekly Pan-African News. Happy New Year to all of you. Now please stay tuned for some tunes and some flyers.
Preocupado el presidente anaranjado, viendo que las elecciones las perdió.
Solicita a los que le hacen los mandados que se apuren pues la fiesta terminó.
Y mirando que se va a acabar el varo,
Han formado un titingo. Se han negado a abandonar la Casa Blanca. A la silla del despacho se amarró. Los pelitos que le quedan los arranca, pataleando por la rabia que le dio. Y mirando a Cuba con sus batas blancas, de cabeza se tiró.
El que tenga confusión que se confunda, el que quiera claridad que venga a ver.
La jugada no es compleja ni profunda, está claro cómo quieren proceder.
Solo falta que nosotros los dejemos,
Y eso no va a